The mining colony of Vexus Prime was a world of dust and metal. Sergeant Marcus Thane stood on the watchtower and looked at the gray sky above. Nothing ever changed on this planet. The workers dug deep into the earth to find precious minerals for the Imperium. Marcus and his small garrison of soldiers protected them from raiders and Xenos threats. It was boring work, but boring meant safe. Marcus had learned to appreciate boring after 20 years of war. The colony had 3,000 souls living in metal buildings that groaned in the wind. Children played in the dusty streets while their parents worked the mines. Marcus watched them and felt a small warmth in his chest. This was what he fought for. Not glory or medals, but these simple people living their simple lives. The sky changed color without warning. Marcus saw it first as a shimmer, like heat rising from hot metal. Then the shimmer became a crack, and the crack became a tear in reality itself. Purple light spilled out from the wound in the sky. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Marcus had seen many horrors in his years of service, but nothing prepared him for what came next. Ships emerged from the purple light. They were unlike any Imperial vessel. They were thin and cruel, with sharp edges that seemed designed to cut the very air. They moved in silence, which made them even more frightening. Behind them, the tear in the sky pulsed like a living thing. Marcus grabbed his Vox communicator and screamed the alarm. Sirens wailed across the colony. Workers dropped their tools and ran for the shelters. Mothers grabbed their children and fled. But Marcus knew in his heart that it was already too late. The ships were too fast. The attack was too sudden. The raiders came down like a dark rain. Marcus had heard stories about them. Every soldier in the Imperium had heard the stories. The Drukhari. The Dark Eldar. They did not come to conquer or destroy. They came to take. They came to capture living souls and drag them back to their nightmare city. What happened after that was something Marcus did not want to think about. The Cabalite warriors wore armor that seemed to drink the light around them. Their weapons fired crystals of pure darkness that tore through flesh and metal alike. Marcus rallied his soldiers and formed a defensive line near the main shelter. They fired their lost guns at the advancing Xenos, but the Drukhari moved like shadows. They were there one moment and gone the next. A warrior came at Marcus with a blade that glowed with poison. Marcus shot him twice in the chest. The warrior fell and did not rise. Another came, and Marcus killed that one too. His soldiers fought bravely, but they were falling one by one. The Drukhari were simply too fast, too skilled. Then the Waishas arrived. They were female warriors who moved with impossible grace. They did not wear heavy armor like the Cabalite warriors. Instead, they wore almost nothing, their pale skin decorated with ritual scars. They carried blades and whips and weapons Marcus had never seen before. They danced through the battle like it was a performance, killing with every step. One of them came for Marcus. She was taller than him, with long white hair and eyes that held no mercy. She moved so fast that Marcus could barely track her. His lost gun fired wild shots that hit nothing. Then she was upon him. A kick sent his weapon flying. A strike to his knee dropped him to the ground. Her blade pressed against his throat. Marcus waited for death. He had accepted it long ago as the price of service. But death did not come. Instead, the witch smiled at him. It was the coldest smile he had ever seen. She spoke in low Gothic, her voice like silk over broken glass. She said that he had earned something worse than death. She said that his fighting spirit had caught the attention of her masters. She said that he would come with them to a place beyond nightmares. Marcus tried to fight back, but more Drukhari grabbed him. They bound his hands with chains that burned his skin. Around him, he could hear the screams of the colonists being dragged from the shelters. Children crying for their mothers. Mothers crying for their children. The Drukhari laughed at the sounds like it was music. An Archon descended from the lead ship. He wore armor covered in trophies taken from his victims. His face was beautiful in the way that a knife is beautiful, sharp and dangerous. He surveyed the carnage with satisfaction and gave orders in a language that hurt to hear. The Drukhari began herding their captives toward the portal in the sky. Marcus was pushed and kicked along with the others. He looked back at his colony one last time. The buildings burned with purple fire. Bodies of his soldiers lay in the dust. Everything he had protected was gone in minutes. The portal swallowed him whole. There was a moment of terrible cold, and then Marcus found himself somewhere else. The air was different here. It tasted like pain and fear. The light came from no sun, but from strange crystals that lined impossible towers stretching up forever. Marcus looked around and felt his sanity crack at the edges that he stood in a city that should not exist. Towers of black metal rose higher than any mountain. Bridges connected them, and on those bridges walked creatures that were not human. Ships flew between the spires, and from somewhere far away came the sound of millions of voices screaming in eternal agony. This was Commerack. This was the Dark City. This was where the Drukhari brought their victims to suffer for all eternity. Marcus fell to his knees as the weight of his fate crushed down upon him. Behind him, the portal closed, and with it went any hope of escape. Marcus did not know how long he stayed on his knees. Time moved differently in this place. There was no sun to mark the hours, no natural rhythm to anchor his mind. The Drukhari guards eventually pulled him up and threw him into a cage made of black metal. The bars hummed with energy that burned when touched. The cage hung from a chain attached to nothing. It floated in the air above a street that stretched for miles in both directions. Other cages hung nearby, filled with creatures from across the galaxy. Marcus saw humans, but he also saw aliens he could not name. Some of them had stopped moving long ago. Others screamed without pause, their minds broken by what they had witnessed. Below the cages, the citizens of Commerack walked about their business. They looked like the warriors who had attacked the colony, but there were many variations. Some were tall and thin with elongated limbs. Others were short and twisted, their bodies modified in ways that made Marcus sick to look at. They laughed and talked and bought slaves from vendors on the street corners like it was perfectly normal. Marcus gripped the bars of his cage and tried not to look down. The drop was so far that he could not see the bottom. Maybe there was no bottom. Maybe the city went down forever into darkness. A voice spoke from the cage beside him. It was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Marcus turned and saw something that made his heart lift with desperate hope. A space marine hung in the next cage. His armor was damaged and his face was bloody, but he was alive. The warrior wore the colors of the Black Templars, one of the most fearsome chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. The space marine introduced himself as Brother Corvain. He had been captured 3 days ago during a mission gone wrong. His entire squad was dead. He alone survived, though he wished he had died with his brothers. The Drukhari had kept him alive because space marines were rare prizes. They could be tortured for centuries and still not die. Marcus asked if escape was possible. Corvain was silent for a long moment. Then he said that no one escaped Commerack. The city existed outside normal space, hidden in a dimension between worlds. Even if someone broke free from their cage, where would they go? The webway surrounded everything, and only the Drukhari knew how to navigate it. Another prisoner spoke up. Her name was Alira, and she had been a navigator on an Imperial ship. Navigators were mutants born with a third eye that could see the currents of the warp. Her third eye had been sealed shut with burning metal by the Drukhari. They feared her power but wanted to keep her alive for study. She told Marcus that she had been here for weeks, maybe months. She had lost count of the torture she had endured. The three of them talked in whispers, sharing what little information they had. There were 8 captives in total who had been kept separate from the main group. Marcus recognized some of them from the colony, strong workers who had fought back during the raid. They had been chosen for something, but none of them knew what. The answer came when the Archon arrived. His name was Vresk, and he led the cable of the poisoned heart. He floated up to the cages on a platform of dark metal and inspected each prisoner with cold interest. When he reached Marcus, he smiled. He said that Marcus had killed 2 of his warriors during the raid. That was impressive for a human. That was why Marcus had been chosen for the arena. The word sent ice through Marcus's veins. He had heard stories about the witch arenas of Commerack. They were places where the Drukhari watched their captives fight and die for entertainment. The suffering of the victims fed something inside the Drukhari, keeping them young and strong. Vresk explained the rules. The 8 captives would fight in the arena until only one remained alive. That survivor would be granted the honor of serving in Vresk's household as a slave. It was better than the alternative. Those who died in the arena would be given to the homunculi. Marcus did not know what homunculi were, but the way Vresk said the word made his blood turn cold. After Vresk left, a new visitor came. This one was different from any Drukhari Marcus had seen. He was ancient, with skin like old paper stretched over sharp bones. He wore robes covered in tools that looked like surgical instruments merged with torture devices. His eyes held no emotion at all, not even cruelty. Just empty curiosity. Brother Corvain whispered that this was Urian Rakarth, the most famous homunculus in Comarak. He was a master of flesh and pain who had lived for thousands of years. He could take a person apart piece by piece and keep them alive through the entire process. He could kill and resurrect the same victim hundreds of times. Rakarth examined Marcus through the cage bars. He touched Marcus's face with fingers that were too long and too cold. He said that Marcus had strong life force. He said that if Marcus survived the arena, Rakarth would claim him as a personal project. He would make Marcus into something beautiful. Then Rakarth laughed, and it was the worst sound Marcus had ever heard. The cage doors opened without warning. Drukhari guards pulled the prisoners out and chained them together. They were marched through the streets of Comarak toward a massive structure in the distance. It was round and covered in spikes, like a crown made for a demon king. The arena waited for them. The crowd was already cheering. The games were about to begin. The arena was larger than any stadium on any imperial world. It rose up from the dark streets of Comarak like a monument to suffering. The walls were covered with screens that showed every angle of the killing floor below. Millions of Drukhari filled the seats, their faces hungry for pain. Marcus and the other prisoners were pushed through tunnels beneath the arena. The walls were decorated with the bones of previous victims. Some of the skulls were human. Others belonged to creatures Marcus could not identify. All of them had died screaming. He could feel it somehow, like their agony had soaked into the very stones. The 8 captives were brought to a preparation chamber. Guards removed their chains and threw crude weapons at their feet. There were rusty swords, broken spears, and clubs wrapped in wire. These weapons were not meant to give the prisoners a fair chance. They were meant to make the fight last longer. Brother Corvain picked up a sword that was too small for his massive hands. His space marine armor had been stripped away, leaving him in just a bodysuit. Even without his armor, he was still a giant compared to the humans. His muscles were like cables of steel, and his eyes burned with hatred for their captors. Elira grabbed a short blade and held it close to her chest. Her sealed third eye wept a single tear of blood. She whispered prayers to the Emperor. Though Marcus doubted the Emperor could hear anything in this forsaken place, that a horn sounded, and the doors to the arena floor opened. The prisoners walked out into blinding light. The crowd roared with excitement as they saw the fresh victims. Marcus shielded his eyes and tried to take in his surroundings. The arena floor was covered in sand that was brown with old blood. Platforms of different heights rose from the ground, creating obstacles and hiding spots. In the center stood a throne where a figure watched everything. She was the most beautiful and terrifying creature Marcus had ever seen. She sat on the throne like she owned the very concept of death. Her body was covered in ritual scars that formed patterns of deadly grace. Her smile promised pain beyond imagination. This was a succubus, a leader of the witch cults. She announced that the games would now begin. The first challenge was not against each other. Gates opened on the far side of the arena, and shapes emerged from the darkness. They were not solid. They were made of shadow and hatred, with too many limbs and mouths full of needle teeth. Chimeri. Creatures from the warp itself, bound by Drukhari sorcery to serve as arena beasts. The shadow creatures attacked without warning. Marcus raised his rusty sword and swung at the nearest chimera. The blade passed through its body like it was made of smoke. The creature laughed with a sound like breaking bones and slashed at Marcus with claws that were very much solid. Pain exploded across his chest as the claws tore through his clothes and into his flesh. Brother Corvain moved like lightning despite his injuries. He grabbed a chimera by its throat and squeezed until it burst into fragments of shadow. Another creature leaped onto his back, biting into his shoulder. He roared and threw it against the arena wall. The other prisoners were not so lucky. 2 of them went down in the first seconds, torn apart by the shadow beasts. A third tried to run and was dragged into the darkness screaming. The crowd cheered with each death, feeding on the fear and pain like it was sweet wine. Marcus found himself back to back with Alira. She moved with surprising skill, her small blade finding the weak points in the chimera where shadow met shadow. She told Marcus to protect her blind side. Together they held off 3 of the creatures while Corvain destroyed 2 more. Another prisoner died. Then another. The sand drank their blood greedily. Finally, only Marcus, Alira, Corvain, and 1 other prisoner remained. The surviving chimera retreated back through the gates. The succubus stood and applauded slowly. She said that the first round was complete. The survivors had earned the right to rest before the next challenge. Guards came and dragged the survivors back to cells beneath the arena. The cells were small and wet and smelled of death. Marcus collapsed against the wall and tried to stop his wounds from bleeding. His chest burned with every breath. The chimera claws had gone deep. Alira used strips from her clothing to bandage his wounds. Her hands were gentle despite everything. She said that Marcus fought well for someone with no training against warped creatures. Marcus almost laughed. Fighting well meant nothing here. They were all going to die. It was just a matter of when. Brother Corvain sat in the corner of his cell and prayed silently. Even the Space Marine looked tired. His wounds were healing faster than any normal humans would, but even gene-enhanced bodies had limits. Hours passed. Or maybe days. Marcus could not tell. Then the cell door opened, and Syrinx walked in. She was the Hecatrix who had captured Marcus on Vexus Prime. She moved with that same deadly grace, her eyes studying him like he was a piece of meat. She made him an offer. Become her personal champion, fight for her entertainment, and she would give him comfortable quarters and decent food. Refuse, and tomorrow he would face a Talos pain engine. She explained what a Talos was. A machine made of flesh and metal, powered by captured souls, designed to cause maximum suffering without killing quickly. Marcus looked at her cold, beautiful face. He thought about accepting. He thought about the easy path of submission. Then he thought about the screaming children from his colony and the soldiers who had died under his command. That he told her no. Syrinx smiled wider than should be possible. She said she had hoped he would refuse. His breaking would be so much sweeter for the waiting. She left, and Marcus heard something in the distance. A mechanical screaming that sounded like 1,000 voices crying out in eternal agony. The Talos was being prepared. The arena was different for the second challenge. The platforms had been removed. The sand had been raked clean of blood. In the center of the empty space stood a machine that should not exist. The Talos pain engine was as tall as 3 men standing on each other's shoulders. Its body was a nightmare fusion of flesh and metal, with tubes pumping dark fluid through its frame. Its arms ended in blades and syringes and devices that Marcus could not name but could easily imagine the purpose of. Its face was a screen showing the twisted expressions of the souls trapped inside, their mouths open in endless screams. Marcus stood alone on the arena floor. He had been given a better weapon this time, a real sword taken from some forgotten battlefield. It felt good in his hands, but he knew it would not be enough. Nothing would be enough against this monster. The succubus announced the challenge. Marcus would fight the Talos until he died. There was no victory condition. There was no escape. The only question was how long he could last before the machine took him apart. The Talos moved forward on legs that bent the wrong way. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet controlled by a drunk puppeteer. But it was fast. Faster than something that size should be. Marcus barely dodged the first strike, a blade that would have cut him in half. He ran. There was no shame in running when the alternative was immediate death. He circled the arena, keeping distance between himself and the machine. The crowd booed his cowardice. They wanted blood. They wanted screaming. Marcus did not care what they wanted. The Talos adapted quickly. It predicted his movements and cut off his escape routes. A syringe arm shot out and grazed his shoulder, injecting something that made his vision blur. Pain flooded his nervous system, worse than any wound. He screamed despite himself, and the crowd cheered. Then something unexpected happened. Brother Corvain burst through the arena gates. Guards lay unconscious behind him. He had somehow broken free from his cell and fought his way to the arena floor. The crowd gasped in shock. This was not part of the program. The Space Marine charged the Talos with nothing but his bare hands. He hit the machine like a thunderbolt, staggering it backward. His fists pounded against its metal frame, denting plates and cracking tubes. The Talos turned its attention to this new threat, giving Marcus a moment to recover. Together, they fought the nightmare machine. Marcus attacked from one side while Corvain attacked from the other. The Talos could not focus on both of them at once. Its strikes became wild and desperate. Corvain found a weak point in its torso where the flesh met the metal and drove his fingers deep inside. He pulled and tore, ripping out cables and organs alike. The Talos screamed with the voices of its trapped souls. It was dying. For one beautiful moment, Marcus thought they might actually win. Then the tail struck. The Talos had a tail that ended in a barbed spike. It moved faster than either of them could react. The spike punched through Corvain's chest and lifted him off the ground. The Space Marine coughed blood and looked down at the wound that would kill even someone like him. Marcus screamed and attacked with everything he had. His sword found the same weak point Corvain had exposed. He drove the blade deep and twisted. The Talos shuddered and collapsed, its systems finally failing. Corvain fell with it. Marcus ran to the fallen Space Marine and cradled his head. Corvain was still alive, but barely. His enhanced body was fighting a losing battle against the wound. He had minutes at most. The dying warrior grabbed Marcus's arm with surprising strength. He said there was something Marcus needed to know. There were those who raided Comarak to free slaves. A faction of Eldar who had rejected the dark ways of their kin. They were led by a prophet called Evrain. She commanded the Inari, followers of the god of the dead. Corvain confessed that he had been sending information to Evrain's agents for months. He had been preparing for a rescue mission that would free as many slaves as possible. His capture had been part of the plan, though things had gone wrong. The Inari were coming. Marcus just had to survive until they arrived. Then Brother Corvain died. Marcus held the body as guards swarmed the arena floor. He did not resist when they pulled him away. He was too empty to resist. The one person who had given him hope was gone. Archon Vresk descended from his viewing box, his face twisted with fury. The Space Marine had ruined his entertainment. The crowds were confused and angry. Someone had to pay for this disruption. Vresk pointed at Marcus and gave an order. No more arena games. This human would be given to Urian Rakarth immediately. The homunculus would teach him the true meaning of suffering. Guards dragged Marcus through tunnels that went deep beneath the city. The air grew colder and smelled of chemicals and rotting flesh. They entered a laboratory that stretched for miles in every direction. Tables lined the walls, and on those tables lay things that had once been living creatures. Rakarth was waiting. The ancient homunculus smiled as Marcus was strapped to a surgical table. He explained what would happen next. He would cut Marcus open and remove each organ one by one, keeping him alive and conscious through the entire process. Then he would put the organs back and start again. He would do this hundreds of times until Marcus's mind shattered completely. Rakarth raised his surgical tools. They gleamed with cruel promise. Then alarms began screaming throughout Comarak. Rakarth paused and looked up. Explosions echoed in the distance. The laboratory shook as something massive struck the city above. Through a window, Marcus saw ships descending through the eternal darkness. They carried a symbol he did not recognize, a skull surrounded by flowing curves. The Inari had come. The city of Comarak was burning. Marcus could see the flames through the laboratory window. Ships bearing the symbol of the Inari cut through the darkness, firing weapons that tore holes in the ancient spires. Explosions rocked the foundations of the Dark City. For the first time in thousands of years, the hunters had become the hunted. Urian Rakarth cursed in a language that hurt to hear. He set down his surgical tools and turned to leave. He told Marcus that this interruption was temporary. The Inari were fools to attack Comarak. They would be destroyed, and then Rakarth would return to finish his work. He promised Marcus an eternity of suffering. Then the homunculus left to defend his domain. Marcus lay strapped to the table, helpless and alone. Around him, the tortured victims of Rakarth's experiments moaned and whimpered. Some of them begged for death. Others had lost the ability to speak at all. The laboratory was a gallery of horrors that would haunt Marcus for whatever remained of his life. Minutes passed. The sounds of battle grew closer. Then the laboratory door exploded inward. Alira stood in the doorway, her hands crackling with strange energy. Her sealed third eye had been forced open, glowing with terrible light. She had used her navigator powers to break free from her cell and fight her way through the chaos. The effort was clearly killing her. Blood ran from her eyes and nose, but she did not stop. She reached Marcus and burned through his restraints with a touch. He fell from the table and landed hard on the floor. His body was weak from everything he had endured, but he forced himself to stand. They had to move. They had to escape while the Drukhari were distracted. Together, they ran through the laboratory. Alira Mercy killed the prisoners who could not be saved, using her powers to give them quick deaths instead of endless torture. Each death cost her something. Marcus could see her fading with every step. But she refused to leave anyone behind to suffer. They found weapons in a storage room. Marcus grabbed a Drukhari blade that felt wrong in his hands but would kill effectively. Alira took a pistol and checked its charge. Then they continued through the tunnels toward the surface. The fighting above was intense. Inari warriors in flowing armor battled Drukhari defenders in every corridor. The newcomers fought with precision and purpose, pushing deeper into the city despite heavy resistance. Marcus and Alira avoided the main battles, taking side passages that Alira somehow knew. Then they reached the throne room of Archon Vresk. The Archon stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the bodies of his guards. He had killed the Inari attackers who had breached his sanctum, but more were coming. His armor was damaged and his face was twisted with rage. When he saw Marcus and Alira, he laughed bitterly. He said that even if Comarak fell, these two slaves would never leave alive. He had personally captured them. They belonged to him. Their souls were his property. Marcus raised his stolen blade and faced the Archon. Vresk was faster than any creature Marcus had ever seen. He moved like liquid shadow, his blade cutting the air with deadly precision. Marcus blocked the first strike, barely. The second opened a gash on his arm. The third would have taken his head if Alira had not blasted the Archon with her pistol. The shot staggered Vresk for a moment. Marcus used that moment to attack. His blade found a gap in the Archon's damaged armor. Blood the color of dark wine spilled onto the floor. Vresk screamed in shock and fury. A slave had wounded him. A mere human had drawn his blood. The Archon's counterattack was savage. He knocked Marcus to the ground and raised his blade for the killing stroke. His eyes burned with hatred that had been building for thousands of years. A new blade stopped him. A woman appeared between Marcus and the Archon. She was Eldar, but different from the Drukhari. Her armor was sleek and decorated with bones and spirit stones. Her weapon glowed with the light of captured souls. Her face was beautiful and sad and ancient. Ivrain, the prophet of the Inari, had come. She moved faster than Vresk. Her blade cut through his defenses like they were not there. One strike took his sword arm. Another opened his throat. The Archon fell to his knees, gasping his last breaths. Ivrain watched him die with no emotion on her face. Then she turned to Marcus and Alira. She said that Brother Corvain had been one of her informants. He had spent years preparing for this mission, gathering intelligence and identifying slaves who could be rescued. His sacrifice had made this raid possible. The Inari had come to honor his memory and free those he had tried to save. Ivrain led them through the burning city to a webway portal. Her warriors held the passage open against waves of Drukhari reinforcements. One by one, the rescued slaves passed through the portal to safety. Marcus helped Alira walk. Her navigator powers had burned her from the inside, and she could barely stand. They emerged on a Inari ship far from Comarak. The air was clean. The light was natural. For the first time since his capture, Marcus felt something other than fear and pain, that he was free. The ship carried them away from the dark city. Behind them, Comarak tore itself apart in civil war. The Archons blamed each other for the successful raid. The homunculi demanded compensation for their lost subjects. The city that had stood for millions of years was wounded in a way it had never been wounded before. Marcus sat alone in his quarters and stared at his hands. They were covered in scars that would never fully heal. His mind carried wounds that were even deeper. He had seen things that no human should ever see. He had suffered tortures that broke the boundary between body and soul. Alira found him there. Her third eye was sealed again, this time by her own choice. She could not bear to see the warp anymore. She sat beside Marcus and told him that survival was its own kind of victory. They had escaped a place where escape was supposed to be impossible. Marcus said that he did not feel like he had escaped. Part of him was still there in Comarak. Part of him would always be strapped to that table, waiting for the knife. Alira took his hand. She said that was true for her as well. They would carry the dark city with them forever. But they would also carry each other. They were bound now by shared suffering that no one else could understand. Marcus looked out the window at the stars. Real stars, not the false lights of Comarak. He made a decision. He would spend whatever remained of his life fighting the Drukhari. He would warn others about the horrors that lurked in the dark between worlds. He would make sure that fewer souls fell into the nightmare. Far away, in his ruined laboratory, Urian Rakarth held a vial containing a single drop of blood. Marcus's blood, taken during the brief examination. The homunculus smiled his empty smile. Blood could be tracked. Blood could be cloned. Blood could be used to find someone no matter where they hid. The homunculus had eternity to wait, and he always finished his projects.